Welcome back to the channel. Got a whole bunch of stuff going on today. We got one of the cars that you guys have been waiting to see come back to the shop, as well as we're going to finish up some work on the Datsun, and we're actually going to take the Oldsmobile for another drive in December. Look who it is. All right, look who it is. Steve 2.0 means we're gonna get some shit done today. Also, the Hornet is back. That's right. So this is probably the last time that we're going to drive this car for this year. We're looking to be those two guys that drive their classics in December. They salted the roads last night, and we know what that means. We'll have to rinse the cars off. Don't worry about it. It's our problem, not yours. Steve drove this car out here today. It's leaking a little bit. We're going to find out what that is. We suspect the water pump that came with this used 360 is junk. There's actually water coming, hitting the top side of the balancer as it's spinning, and it's flinging it all over the place. You can see there's evidence of it there. If you look into the back side of the water pump pulley up there, you can actually see a line of rust water that's formed from the water pump weep hole. We've confirmed it. The water pump is bad in this thing. We have to change it out. Probably not today, but it's on the list. This is the 304 that originally came out of this car. We've slowly been parting this thing out to use for pieces to go on the 360 over there. So this thing has a good water pump and a good timing cover assembly right here. And AMC's, they have the oil pump right here. And the one on the 360 is actually leaking from the top of this pressed in shaft right here. It's actually leaking around that. Over the winter here, we're going to pull the water pump and the front cover off of this engine and put it onto the 360. And then the other upgrade that's coming for this car, at least in the near future, is this giant mechanical fan is going away, as well as this shroud, and we're going to run a Ford Taurus fan on this thing. This is a well-known accessory. So this right here is a Ford Taurus fan. You can get these from the junkyard or Rock Auto, brand new. It has some really heavy gauge wire. It has a low speed and a high speed. This thing moves a ton of air. It has a built-in shroud, and they're relatively cheap. So this thing is actually going to fit almost perfectly. It's almost perfectly the same size as the AMC radiator. Huge upgrade for the Hornet. So we've got some other friends that are coming a little bit later. They were in the Dart video. They're coming down today to help us wrench on the Datsun. Goal today is to try to get the coilovers sorted out in the front. We need a little colder right there. Perfect. That's if I know what I'm talking about.
Little, just a couple Kelvins colder.
Exactly. Oh, it's recording. Hey, it's recording. Nice. We're gonna pop the wheels off here, and we're actually gonna remove the coilover or the whole strut assembly from either side, because per Ryan Hicks's Fab Garage, we do actually have a steering problem when we try to go lock to lock. And I'll show you what I'm talking about.
It's fine, everything's fine.
Yeah, and well, there's only 3 lug nuts on each wheel. But as Puddin says, if 3 won't hold it, 4 never would, right? Thank you, sir. Start calling you Rupert, right? Rupert!
Rupert, just take the wheel.
In here, we got to remove the coilover. In order to do that, there's 2 bolts here that run through the tension rod into the lower control arm. There are also supposed to be 2 bolts that hold the ball joint to the lower control arm. This is an old ball joint, and I think the bolts that I have either broke or I lost them somewhere. So the basics of what we're doing here is we're actually going to take the passenger side strut, we're going to unbolt it from the steering arm down here, and we're going to put this over on the driver's side. It's going to move the caliper to the front side of the wheel. It's going to make sure that the steering arm back here does not contact the caliper, I think is what the problem is. Something like that. So that's what we're going to try to avoid. By putting the caliper on the front, we will not have any potential clearance issues here. So right here, these are the two bolts that hold the radius rod or the strut rod. What is that thing called? Any of you Datsun aficionados, please comment that. What the heck is this called? A tension rod, a radius rod? What is it? I don't know. Whatever that rod is, it bolts in right here. These two bolts right here will remove it and allow the strut to remove from the lower control. There we are. So now the strut is just dangling by the bolts up top. All right, so Steve is going to pop the 3 bolts on the strut tower on top, and this whole thing should fall right into my lap. All right, there we go. Okay, we're gonna pop the other one out and then we'll meet you guys over at the bench. Essentially what we're gonna do here is there's 2 bolts here that hold the ball joint to the underside of the steering arm. We'll pop those off, and then I believe we have to get to the ball joint bolt or nut. We may not have to. Let's try it. We'll pull these off first and see if we can just swap everything over. That was as easy as I thought. It's been a little bit since I put these together, but yeah. So essentially we're gonna take this right here, which is the steering arm. It also includes a steering arm spacer. This is to correct bump steer. So we're gonna take this guy and we're gonna flip it over to the other side, which will allow the caliper to go in front, so there won't be any clearance issues potentially right here. This is the driver's side strut, and this is the passenger side steering arm and ball joint and everything. So the other steering arm came right off. This goes right in, fits right in place, and you run the bolts through there. And now if you look, the steering arm is at the back. The caliper is in the front. I think we'll take them to the bench next and weld them. Then we can put the top hats on and back in the car.
Think about the time I almost lost you. I know, I was lost too. Had dreams and I lost a few. In flight, we enjoyed this view. Floating on the same wing, missing flight shit. Window seat, not feet, you're my sidekick.
Okay, so we're just gonna do a little bit of powder coating, which is spray painting while the welds are still hot. Look at that. Completely brand new, fresh out of the powder coater. All right, we're gonna take a quick break from working on the Datsun. We're gonna head over to Toic Armadillo Metal Fab. They're having an open house. We're gonna run over there. It's gonna be the last time out for these cars this year, so we'll check that out. So this will be a good test run here to see how this new mount works out in here. Come on. Even though this car is EFI, it's still pretty cold-blooded. Look who's behind me though. I don't know if you guys can see, huh? That's right. The Oldsmobile and the Hornet riding together again, finally. December 2nd in Wisconsin. But it's like almost 40 degrees today, and the roads aren't too salty. I know there's a lot of purists out there that would never take your vintage hot rod out this late in the season, but we're trying it today just because we're about to head into a really long season of depressing, dark, and cold. All right, we made it over here to Toic Armadillo. I'll give you guys a little walk around here and we'll check out what's going on. They got some really, really sick trucks out here. This shop specializes in C10 parts. They do a lot of custom fab parts for bag, body dropped, all sorts of crazy stuff. They also do a lot of bead rolling and a bunch of other custom stuff. So check this out. So the coilovers are all welded now. The next thing that I have to do is fix the top hat situation here. So when this car was set up with coilovers previously, there may have been some steps skipped, and the spring here was allowed to ride right on the top hat. So I'll get you guys in closer here to show you that there's actually a bearing in this top hat, because when the top hat is bolted into the car, the whole strut actually turns when you turn the wheel, and the top hat stays in place. So the strut needs to be able to pivot inside the top hat, unless otherwise you'll get binding in there. So I'll show you what I mean. One part that I was missing, or that I was missing when I set these coilovers up, and was also not present when these were done the first time, is these little guys right here. So this is a top hat for a standard 2.5 inch diameter coilover spring. These are the same diameter springs that come on every other coilover ever made. You get them in all different spring rates. But in order to use these with the Datsun, especially with the factory top hat that has a bearing in here, you need this top hat for the spring. So it fits over the strut tower and locates itself in the center of the spring. So I'm going to put the top hats on and then get these top hats back on here. We'll put these back in the car. Putting these struts on is so much easier to do when you have a friend. My advice, make friends. So a much easier way of doing this, as Steve just figured out, take the top hat off, shove that up in there, get the bolts started for the top hat, then shove the strut up in there, make sure the bearing's in place, thread the nut on top. Yeah, work smarter, not harder. That's what they say. How often does that actually happen though? It's a few days later, and it seems that we've run into yet another snag with the coilovers. Oh man, I'm thirsty. Need a drink. Capri Suns are dope. If you think you're too old for this, you might be too old for this channel. Everything under here looks fine, except for it seems like, or looks like, our Datsun experienced a little bit of a growth spurt. So any of you longtime coilover guys probably know, especially you Honda guys, no hate, just saying, I've been there. When you put coilovers on a car like this, especially if the strut is not a shorter strut, and this one is, but especially if it's not the same height as the spring with the setting that you have for your ride height, what can happen is this thing can get loose. With the coilover setup that I made here, with a sleeve and then the perch and then the coilover spring, there's extra length left on the new shock that sticks up past the coil spring. So if I put this nice top hat on here, that's all good, and it should keep the spring centered over the shock shaft. However, when this thing is at full droop, or when the strut is allowed to fully extend, this whole thing can move around. So that creates a problem because the strut bearing sits inside the top hat, and this aluminum top hat, or this aluminum upper spring hat, if you want to call it that, rides right on that bearing. But if all of this is loose and able to jostle around, there's potential for this aluminum top hat to fall outside of the spring, and or for the bearing to be off center and come out of the top hat, or right here. So in order to fix that, they use what are called helper springs, which is a secondary spring that's super, super light. I think they have like a 40-pound spring rate or something like that. That little lighter spring goes underneath this larger spring, and it sits up against the perch so that when the car goes into full droop, this whole coil spring is allowed to move up and stay in tight contact, with the actual strut top hat here. That way this bearing won't fall out, and this aluminum hat right here won't fall out, and we won't have any weird crunching and grinding or anything in the front end. So short story is, I need more parts and I don't have them. And even if I order them today and try to overnight them, I'm not gonna have them in time to put this video out. I apologize for all the talking in this video. I know that you guys probably get sick of that. This is kind of how putting cars together goes sometimes. I've ordered, or I will order, the helper springs really soon. I have ordered a couple of parts that I need to put the fenders and the whole front end of the Datsun back together, so that it will not look like it's got its teeth knocked out anymore. It'll start to look more like a car again. All right, I'm gonna stop yakking at the camera and wrap this one up. Thank you everyone for watching. All of you liking, commenting, subscribing, keep that up. If you're not subscribed, consider hitting that button. I really appreciate it, and we will see you in the next one.